Just pour it. Pour it until the lane is gone. He's got no permit to prove this easement is his. Mordecai Slate didn't look at the man he was robbing. He looked at his watch. Rolex. Submariner. Gold. He gestured to the concrete mixer. A gray, heavy sludge began to swallow the gravel. Thaddeus Grimshaw stood on his porch. He held a ceramic mug, chipped, stained by 40 years of black coffee. He watched the concrete rise. The whetstone licked the tires of his 1994 Ford F-150. "You're certain about this, son?" Thaddeus asked. His voice was low, dry leaves on pavement. Mordecai laughed. He didn't look back. "Sue me, old man, if you're still breathing by the time a judge sees the file. Right now, this road doesn't exist. You're officially a tenant of your own backyard." Mordecai didn't know about the rusted metal cabinet in the cellar. He didn't know about the 4 miles of high-voltage copper lines buried 30 feet below his boots. Thaddeus didn't argue. He didn't call the sheriff. He simply took a sip of his coffee. Cold, bitter, perfect. That night, the $50 million Onyx Heaven project went dark. Every light, every heater, every glass elevator, silence. Total, absolute. Black Crag Basin, Montana, a place where the wind doesn't just blow. It bites. It remembers. The basin was a graveyard of failed dreams until Onyx Horizon Group arrived. They brought bulldozers. They brought men in slim-fit suits. They brought Balthazar Krell. Krell was the CEO, a man who bought land the way other men bought groceries. To him, Thaddeus Grimshaw's 14 acres were a smudge on a billion-dollar blueprint, a mistake to be erased. The project was called Onyx Heaven, a gated community for people who wanted to look at the mountains without getting their boots dirty. 62 luxury villas, a 5-star clubhouse, heated infinity pools. All of it surrounded Thaddeus's small timber house. The developers offered him $300,000. Thaddeus said no. They offered $500,000. Thaddeus didn't answer. He was busy fixing a fence post. Then came the final offer, $1 million. A fortune for a man who wore the same denim jacket since the Reagan administration. Thaddeus looked Balthazar Krell in the eye. "My family's sweat is in this dirt," he said. "Your money is just paper. Paper burns." Krell didn't like the word no. He hired Mordecai Slate to handle the infrastructure transition. In plain English, to bully an old man out of his home. The driveway was the first move. A tactical strike. The lane was 12 feet wide. It ran through a sliver of land Onyx Horizon claimed was theirs due to a mapping error from 1954. Mordecai Slate arrived at 7:02 a.m. He brought 3 mixers and a crew of 6. They didn't just block the road. They erased it. They poured 6 inches of high PSI industrial concrete across 40 feet of the driveway. They built a wall, 4 feet high, steel reinforced. By noon, Thaddeus Grimshaw was trapped. No way out for his truck. No way in for a grocery delivery. No way in for an ambulance. Mordecai stood on top of the fresh wall. He lit a cigar. The smoke was expensive. It smelled like cedar and arrogance. "How's the view now, Thaddeus?" he shouted. Thaddeus was in his garden. He was pruning an apple tree. He didn't look up. His shears made a clean snip. Then another snip. He moved with the rhythm of a man who had all the time in the world. He knew something Mordecai didn't. He knew that beneath that wall sat the Echo 7 substation. Thaddeus wasn't just a farmer. He was an engineer. Not the kind with a mahogany desk. The kind with a tool belt and a scarred hard hat. He spent 42 years with Montana Power and Light. He knew the grid. He knew where the veins of the state pulsed. In 1985, the state needed a hub, a brain for the Western Basin. The terrain was brutal. Granite. Permafrost. Thaddeus made them a deal. He gave them an easement. A permanent right to house the Echo 7 hub beneath his north pasture. It was a marvel of Cold War engineering. It handled 34% of the county's load. The contract was signed on June 14, 1985. It was a 3-page document. Typed on a Remington, it carried the state seal. Paragraph 4 was the most important. It stated that the owner of the land must maintain a clear, unobstructed path for emergency maintenance at all times. Unobstructed meant 24-hour access for heavy machinery. If that access was blocked, the operator, Thaddeus, had the legal mandate to isolate the sector to prevent a catastrophic grid failure. In the language of power, isolate meant kill. Thaddeus walked into his house. His boots left no marks on the hardwood. He kept a clean home. He went to the basement. The air was cool. It smelled of oil and old paper. He opened a gray metal locker. Inside was a telephone. No dial, no screen, just a handset. He lifted it. He waited 4 seconds. A voice answered. Grid control. State West. Thaddeus spoke. His voice didn't tremble. This is Thaddeus Grimshaw. Identification 049er. I am reporting a Category 1 obstruction at Echo 7. Access point Alpha is compromised. 6 tons of concrete. Unauthorized. Permanent. Potential thermal buildup in the underground vault. Requesting emergency load shed to protect the transformers. There was a pause on the other end. A long silence. The kind of silence that precedes a landslide. Thaddeus? Is that you? We haven't heard that ID in 10 years. Thaddeus looked at his watch. 7:45 p.m. The concrete is curing, Thaddeus said. The heat can't escape the vents. If you don't drop the load, the oil in those units will boil. You want a fire in the basin? The voice came back. Sharp. Professional. Understood. Commencing emergency isolation of Sector 7B. Logs show Onyx Heaven is the primary draw. We are going dark in 60 seconds. Balthazar Krell stood on the balcony of the Onyx Heaven clubhouse. He adjusted his cufflinks. Gold. Heavy. 18 carats of success. Below him, the elite of Montana and the investors from New York mingled. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted lamb. 4,000 LED lights turned the night into a playground. A string quartet played Mozart. The music was precise. The champagne was Krug. $100 a glass. Krell looked at his watch. 7:59 p.m. In 60 seconds, he would press a button on his tablet, and the massive illuminated sign at the entrance would flare to life. Onyx Heaven, the pinnacle of living. He practiced his smile. It was the smile of a man who had never lost a fight. 8 p.m. The Mozart stopped. Not because the musicians finished the piece. The electric violins simply died. Then the chandeliers. Then the heated floor. Then the $200,000 outdoor projector. Silence. Not the peaceful silence of the mountains. A heavy, unnatural silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. Total darkness. The stars above Montana were the only things left glowing. A woman screamed. A glass shattered on the Italian marble. Krell tapped his tablet. The screen was black. No signal. No Wi-Fi. No power. He looked toward the entrance. The gate wouldn't open. The security system was dead. Mordecai! Krell's voice was a jagged edge in the dark. Mordecai Slate appeared, fumbling with a laser-etched flashlight. The beam shook. I'm here, sir. I'm here. The backup generators. Why aren't they running? They won't kick in, Mr. Krell. The system says external fault. The main breakers at the Echo 7 hub have been tripped remotely. The software has locked us out. It's an emergency grid isolation. Krell grabbed Mordecai by the lapel of his North Face jacket. Fix it, now. There are 3 senators and 40 millionaires sitting in the dark. Fix it or find a new career. Mordecai scrambled toward his Ford Raptor. He drove toward the entrance, his headlights cutting through the freezing mist. He reached the concrete wall he had poured just 13 hours ago. He stopped. On the other side of that gray 4-foot barrier, Thaddeus Grimshaw's house was glowing. Every window was a warm amber. Thaddeus was sitting on his porch. He had a lantern on the table. He was reading a book, a hardcover. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. He didn't look up when Mordecai's truck screeched to a halt. He didn't look up when the sirens of the state power trucks began to wail in the distance. 2 orange trucks from Montana Power and Light arrived 5 minutes later. They didn't have development logos on their doors. They had high-voltage stickers. 3 men stepped out. They didn't wear suits. They wore flame-resistant canvas and heavy leather boots. Their belts clattered with steel tools. They looked at the concrete wall. They looked at the Ford Raptor. They looked at Mordecai. Who's in charge of this site? The lead technician asked. His name tag said Miller. He didn't look impressed. I am, Mordecai said, trying to regain his stature. Open the grid. We're in the middle of a grand opening. We're losing thousands every minute. Miller pulled a digital map from his tablet. He pointed to a spot beneath Mordecai's boots. You see this red line? That's a 3-phase primary trunk. You see this blue box? That's the Echo 7 vault. You poured 6 tons of industrial-grade concrete over the cooling vents and the emergency access hatch. It's our land, Mordecai snapped. We have a permit. Miller didn't blink. You have a building permit. You don't have the authority to bury a state-monitored substation. This is a Category 1 infrastructure violation. Do you know what happens to a transformer when it can't breathe, son? It builds up heat. The oil expands, then it explodes. It takes out the whole valley, including your heaven. Then open the hatch and check it, Mordecai yelled. Miller gestured to the 4-foot-thick wall of curing concrete. I'd love to. But there's a wall in the way. My trucks can't get to the vault. My men can't lift the lid. Until I can physically inspect those breakers, this sector stays dead. Safety protocol Ardide in Delta. Non-negotiable. Thaddeus Grimshaw finally closed his book. He stood up. He walked to the edge of the wall. He looked down at Mordecai. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. The concrete is still wet in the center, Mordecai. If you start now, you might have it cleared by Monday. Of course, the temperature is dropping. It'll be 5 degrees tonight. If those pipes in the clubhouse freeze and burst, well, that's a lot of Italian marble to replace. Balthazar Krell had walked down from the clubhouse. He stood in the mud, his $4,000 Brioni suit ruined. He looked at the technician. He looked at Thaddeus. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't a mistake. This was a trap he had built for himself. How much? Krell asked. His voice was a whisper. Thaddeus looked at him. How much for what, Mr. Krell? For the land. For the access. For you to call them and tell them it's okay. Give me a number. Thaddeus leaned against a fence post. I told you before. My family's sweat is in this dirt. You can't buy that. But you can respect it. He paused. The technician needs 20 feet of clearance. Your wall is 40 feet long. I suggest you get a jackhammer. And Mordecai, don't forget to wear your goggles. Concrete dust is hard on the eyes. Krell turned to Miller. Can we use our own crew to break it? Miller crossed his arms. You can, but my men stay here. If you nick a cable while you're digging, the fine starts at $500,000. And the power stays off until the state inspector arrives. He's in Helena. He won't be back until Wednesday. Krell's face went pale. Wednesday. In 4 days, Onyx Heaven would be a frozen tomb. The investors would be gone. The lawsuits would be piled higher than the mountains. He looked at Mordecai. Mordecai looked at the ground. Get the hammers, Krell said. Mr. Krell? Get the hammers. The sound started at 11:14 p.m., the rhythmic, bone-shaking roar of a pneumatic jackhammer. Then a second one. Then a third. The temperature in the basin dropped to 12 degrees. The moisture in the curing concrete froze, creating internal pressure. It made the work harder. Each strike of the steel bit sent vibrations through the ground. Thaddeus felt it in his floorboards. He didn't mind. He liked the rhythm. It sounded like accountability. Balthazar Krell didn't leave. He sat in the back of his Mercedes-Benz S-Class. The engine was running to keep the heater on. The headlights were pointed at the wall. He watched his hand-picked construction crew, men he usually ignored, toil in the mud. Mordecai Slate was among them. He wasn't wearing his North Face jacket anymore. He was wearing a loaner set of oily coveralls. His hands, usually reserved for signing checks and scrolling through Instagram, were covered in blisters. One had popped. The blood mixed with the gray concrete dust. It turned into a gritty paste. Lower, Miller, the state technician, commanded. He was leaning against his truck, drinking coffee from a thermos. You're still 6 inches above the vent line. If you hit the copper, the arc will vaporize you. Dig. By 3 a.m., the clubhouse was failing. The Onyx Heaven project relied on a complex hydronic heating system. Water-filled pipes snaked beneath the Italian marble floors. Without electricity, the pumps were dead. The water sat still. The temperature reached the freezing point. Then it passed it. Crack. The sound of a $12,000 slab of Carrara marble splitting in half is unique. It sounds like a gunshot in a cathedral. Then another. Crack. The expanding ice was tearing the pinnacle of living apart from the inside. Balthazar Krell heard it from the driveway. He didn't move. He just stared at the house on the hill. Thaddeus's house. Thaddeus came out at 5:30 a.m. The sun wasn't up, but the sky was a deep, bruised purple. He carried a plate of toast, thick cut, sourdough. He leaned on his porch railing. He watched the final slab of the wall being hauled away by a backhoe. The driveway was a ruin of jagged gray stone and twisted rebar. But the vents were clear. The Echo 7 vault was visible. Miller stepped forward. He checked his gauges. He lowered a thermal camera into the vault. He waited. 5 minutes. 10. He looked at his team. Clear. Thermal load is stabilizing. Prepare to energize Sector 7B. Mordecai Slate dropped his jackhammer. He slumped against his truck. His face was gray. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked at Thaddeus. He wanted to scream. He wanted to curse. But he had no breath left. Wait, Thaddeus said. His voice wasn't loud. But the clearing went silent. The workers stopped. Krell opened the door of his Mercedes. Before you flip that switch, Miller, Thaddeus said, walking down his steps. His boots crunched on the gravel. He stopped at the edge of the property line. "We need to discuss the permanent easement." Krell stepped into the mud. His shoes stayed behind, stuck in the muck. He walked in his silk socks. He didn't care anymore. "What do you want, Thorne? You've destroyed the launch. The marble is ruined. The investors are calling their lawyers. You won." Thaddeus pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Not the 1985 contract, a new one. Drafted by his own lawyer, a man who lived in a cabin and charged in venison and whiskey. "This is an annex to the utility easement," Thaddeus said. "It states that the 12-foot lane is officially designated as a state-protected access corridor. It cannot be paved, gated, or obstructed by any private entity, ever. It also grants me a life estate on this property with a 500-yard quiet zone buffer. No construction, no noise, no Onyx Heaven light shows. That's half the golf course," Krell whispered. "Then you should have stayed on your half of the road," Thaddeus replied. Krell looked at the clubhouse. A pipe had finally burst in the ceiling. A waterfall of freezing water was pouring over the mahogany grand piano in the lobby. He could see it through the massive glass windows. Total loss, $742,000 in interior damage. And that was just the first hour. "Sign it," Krell said to Mordecai. "I don't have the authority, sir," Mordecai rasped. "Sign it as my agent, now, before he changes his mind and asks for the whole basin." The paper was signed on the hood of a dusty truck. 6:12 a.m. Thaddeus took the document. He folded it. He put it in his pocket. He looked at Miller. "He's all yours, Miller. Give them their light." Miller flipped the main breaker. The hum started deep in the earth, a low, powerful thrumming that shook the soles of their feet. The Echo 7 hub roared back to life. A quarter-mile away, the Onyx Heaven sign flickered. Onyx Heaven, the pinnacle of living, turned on. Half the letters were shorted out. It just said Onyx Hell. 3 weeks later, the Onyx Horizon Group filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The pinnacle of living was sold to a private conservancy group for pennies on the dollar. Balthazar Krell was ousted by his board. He was last seen in a deposition in New York, facing charges of racketeering and environmental fraud. Mordecai Slate didn't go to jail. He just went broke. The state fined him $140,000 for the infrastructure violation. He sold the Rolex. He sold the Raptor. He took a job driving a delivery truck in Great Falls. He avoids Montana Power and Light vehicles. They make his hands ache. Thaddeus Grimshaw sat on his porch. It was June. The apple trees were in bloom. The air smelled of blossoms and mountain rain. The 12-foot lane was gravel again, just the way he liked it. He opened his book. Marcus Aurelius, page 84. "The best revenge," he read aloud, "is to be unlike him who performed the injury." He took a sip of his coffee. Hot, black, silence. Thaddeus knew the value of a clear path. If you believe wisdom outlasts a bank account, hit the like button. Subscribe for more stories of justice from the high country. And tell us in the comments, have you ever had to flip the breaker on a bully? Stay quiet. Stay prepared. We'll see you in the next one.